candle would be lit. Norah Jones would be drifting her way through the stereo. Red pepper bisque would greet my nose as it was bubbling on the stove. I'd take my shoes off, throw my dance bag down, and shuffle over to the couch. Snuggle into the coziest throw blanket. My life was warm. And this was just a casual Friday night on Burton Street. A night that I was privileged enough to come home to on a regular basis. At 13 years old, I was blinded by the innocence of my childhood. I didn't think about how it would take my mom 4 hours to make that famous recipe. Or at any given point, there could be up to $30 worth of candles burning throughout my house. I didn't think about how hard all of this would be for her to achieve with a chemotherapy bag on her hip. You see, my mom had an infectious warmth to her. Each day, she created spaces that were approachable, comfortable, cozy, supported, places that would foster growth. She was a woman who gave so much to all of those who were around her. Her presence was large, and it definitely didn't go unrecognized. Striving for such an impeccable quality of life was something that was so important to her. So those spaces, those memories, and those lessons that she taught me is something that is so very deeply instilled in me. So, watching the woman who gave me life die almost killed me. 2 years later, and a casual Friday without her looked like any other day of the week. Gray, cold, damp, meaningless. I was stricken with post-traumatic stress disorder, which created a huge barrier between me and my father, resulting in spending many nights couch surfing. I was lucky enough to have older friends at the time who were willing to open their doors to let me crash on their couch, but being functionally homeless meant my mental health declined rapidly. At that point in my life, I would often find myself experiencing many things that were unrecognizable, like going hungry. At 16, I didn't know how to take care of myself. I didn't understand the value of $1. So if I was on my way home from work and I'd find an extra $20 bill in my pocket, I'd think to treat my friends to fast food instead of thinking to invest in myself by buying fresh groceries. This worked out pretty well for me for a couple of months until I came to the harsh realization that you can't make Mom's famous gourmet red pepper bisque with the items that you receive at a food bank. I craved her instant comfort, but I couldn't find those candles or that throw blanket anywhere. How was I supposed to adjust to such a drastic new normal? My privilege had left me blind to the reality of the struggle. I knew that life could be a warm and inviting place, and I was so determined to try and find that again. So I learned to embrace vulnerability. I reached out to my community, and I leaned on them. I set myself up with stable, supportive housing. And I gave myself an environment that would allow for me to move forward. So I started to grow despite the pain. And some days, growing simply looked like getting out of bed, washing my face, and cooking a healthy meal. By setting these realistic day-by-day goals, I was performing a critical act of self-care and self-preservation. I was often fighting for my life. I had to learn to give myself the tender love and care that I so desperately deserved. During my journey, I came to realize that my square one looked different than my peers, because I knew there was something more than despair out there. I knew what healthy looked like, and in that, I was privileged. I found myself surrounded by a community that was overwhelmed with the suffering that stemmed from toxic cycles. These cycles were results of broken support systems, like child welfare, foster care, and income support. I was watching people fall into the bureaucracy, seen as nothing more than a number or a statistic in society. Human beings slip through the cracks and live with demons that I never could have imagined. And what didn't make sense to me then, at 16, was knowing that people were aware that these horrible things were happening in such a deadly, repetitive nature, but nothing drastic was being done to change these systems. I didn't have the answers at the time on how to create systemic change, but I did have something that worked for me. So out of an act of despair, I created Dance Through It. I've learned that in a world where we need so much, how we choose to cope with what life throws our way is one of the few things we have control over. But we aren't taught that. We aren't taught how to cope positively with life struggles in school or in the media. What does a healthy relationship look like? How do we control our anger? How do we process growth? We need answers to these questions in order to thrive independently within society. I had to act. So I invested in a local community center, starting by just volunteering 1 hour a week, teaching young women who were growing up in housing, dancing. Dancing has always acted as my filter. Dancing has taught me to embrace raw emotion, create something beautiful from the dark places in my life. Dancing allows me to explore myself as I grow, and dancing taught me to fall in love with myself again. By expressing my emotions, I find it easier to regulate and release them. I will never forget those first few classes. My students showed a need for a deeper connection by showing up early and insisting on staying late. I came to realize I was breaching one of many huge gaps within support systems. So I grew. I started to facilitate conversations, validate experiences and emotions, and then translate that into movement, helping to aid in students processing life's challenges while enforcing the importance of positive coping, interdependence, self-love, and self-care. It's been over a year now since that first class, and Dance Through It has grown its own set of national legs. On top of curriculum-based programming, I also travel across the country to provide customized sessions to organizations and companies that understand the importance of what I offer. The influx of interest has been overwhelming, and it shows no sign of stopping anytime soon. My mom was a reminder of how resilient we can be when we're dedicated to a cause. From not letting a chemo bag stop her, from coaching basketball teams to gold medals, to cooking those meals filled with love, even after a long day. I'm well aware that being Susan Hicks's daughter is such a gift. And when things were dark, I knew I had to have her resilience in me as well. It just took finding the right cause to pull it out of me. Her death and all of the traumatic events that happened following suit pushed me outside of my comfort zone. And in doing that, it resulted in creating something that's bigger than I am. By sharing what gets me through continues to save others, and that's what resilient leadership looks like. I am my mother's daughter. You don't need to know how to change the world, to change worlds. Thank you.